Hello and welcome to another edition of the Forza Napoli podcast. I am your host, Joe Fischetti. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. On today's episode, we are going to pick our best ever Napoli starting 11. Now, this episode was inspired by Napolitano street artist Yorit, who may not be a familiar name to you, but I am sure you are familiar with at least one or two of his pieces. Yorit is the man behind uh, the Diego Maradona mural on the side of a building in San Giovanni a Teduccio, which is a very famous mural of Maradona. Yoret actually has a couple of pieces in this area. Right next to the Maradona, there is the Nicolo, which is a representation of a Scunizzo, a young street boy from Napoli, for lack of a better term. And on the opposite side of that building, he has those two buildings, he has two Che Guevara murals. So these are all in the same area. The other piece that you might be familiar with is his San Gennaro mural in Forcella. Now, this is a bit of a smaller one, but also a very, very popular one. A couple things about Yorit's work that are kind of his trademarks. One, the most obvious, is just the size of these pieces. The San Gennaro is one of the smaller ones, actually, but the Maradona and many others are gigantic, and it's hard to imagine, and you have to think of how much skill is involved to be able to create such realistic murals when you're painting them from such close range on the side of an entire building, which is really quite phenomenal. Another thing you might have noticed is the red scars beneath the eyes, which is another trademark of Yorit's. And I read a piece by someone named Valeria Obregon for an article or I guess a news outlet called Weave that really described well the meaning of the scars. So I'm just gonna read that. She said, "When I was looking through his art, I noticed the two scars I had seen in the Lucio Dalla mural were present in all his other murals, including the works of Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King Jr. Since 2013, Yorit has focused exclusively on the realistic representation of the human face. He explains that the two red stripes on the cheeks reference African magical and healing rituals, particularly in bodily sacrification procedures, an initiation rite of passage from childhood to adulthood, linked to the symbolic moment of the individual's entry to the tribe. Yorit creates murals of people relevant to the cities he works in and marks them through pictorial ritual. It symbolizes them entering the human tribe. So that is what the red scars below the cheeks mean. Another trademark of Yoritz is what he does actually before he creates his murals, and that is that he usually writes out in just rough script some meaning, some text that has meaning sort of behind the painting, if you will, because then he paints the mural on top of the text. So in the case of Martin Luther King Jr., he had "I Have a Dream" and a whole bunch of other messages in Italian. Now, Yorit is also known for some political pieces that he's done. One of them was in Ukraine, where he painted the little girl on the side of a bombed out building in Mariupol. Now, that one actually got him into a little bit of hot water because the eyes on that piece, or sorry, not the eyes were actually painted in the colors of the flag of the People's Republic of Donetsk, which I don't think is a officially recognized state. But the reason he got into some hot water is because he was called out for the resemblance of this mural to a picture that Helen Whittle took of her daughter that was on the cover of Capture magazine in 2018. And if you're watching the YouTube version of the episode, you can see how similar those two, that picture is to the mural that Yorit did, which he denied. But I mean, I don't think you can really argue with the resemblance there. Another political piece is the George Floyd piece he did during the whole Black Lives Matter movement. It's not the first time that he's gotten into racial discrimination. whether it was the Martin Luther King one that I mentioned earlier. But before I mention some of the other ones, what's really interesting about the George Floyd piece is that he does not have the red scars under his eyes. He actually has what looks like tears of blood coming down his cheek. So that's something that's unique about that piece. But like I said, racial discrimination he's tackled in other works, whether it was Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Angela Davis. But you're probably wondering, what does this Napolitano street artist have to do with an episode on Napoli's best ever starting 11? So the link there, if you don't follow Jorrit on social media, is that he posted on Facebook about a week and a half prior to recording this episode that he has basically been commissioned to create a mural at the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona in one of the grassy areas close to the stadium. And he put it out to the people to basically help him pick a starting 11 that will be painted on this kind of curved shaped I guess cement wall or whatever it is in front of the stadium. A couple things that stood out in his post. There was one line that I'll read out that stood out to me in particular, which said that the players aren't just athletes, but idols who shape the history and the lives of people. Their faces become a part of a great family. So two things I want to highlight there is one, he's not necessarily looking for the most decorated players in Napoli history. If you're doing that, then you really only have two generations of players to choose from. And there was a whole bunch of players in between that we really love and that definitely shaped the city. So that will be taken into consideration when we pick our starting 11. And the other piece is that he mentions their faces becoming a part of a great family. So I think that is a bit of a hint that what this mural will be, and given the history of his body of work, it's always been faces. So I think this mural is going to be the faces of the starting 11 that Napoli Tifosi pick for Jorrit to paint. Just a couple of quick sort of admin items before we get into it. One, if you're looking to find the piece, it is in, like I said, one of the two grass areas in front of the stadium. Most people enter the stadium by via Giambattista Marino. So chances are you're going to pass by. I mean, certainly if you're coming from the south, you're going to pass by the mural as you're getting to the stadium, and it's not too far away if you're coming from the north. The other thing I wanted to mention is based on, after doing my whole assessment of these players, which we're going to get to, and the way I'm going to do this is for each position, whether it's goalkeeper or center backs or fullbacks and so on, I'm not just going to give you my choice. I'm going to give you some other options that I considered and why I considered them. But based on the players that I picked, I used the 4-2-3-1 formation because that just suited what I wanted to get into a starting 11 best. And the last thing I will say is that any stats I reference in this video are from Transfermarkt. Now, I know the way they track assists is not exactly the same way as Serie A does, so they're not going to be perfect, but I think for all intents and purposes, that will suffice. So with that, let's get into our best ever Napoli starting 11. All right, so starting with the goalkeepers, first up, we have David Ospina. Now, he only made about 100 appearances and change. He was constantly battling with Alex Meret for the starting position in goal. He did at one point take over the starting role, and so he did manage quite a few clean sheets. About 38% of those appearances resulted in clean sheets, and he was very good when he did play. Unfortunately, he just didn't play a whole lot because ultimately Alex Meret, as you know, ended up becoming the starting goalkeeper. Technically, he won the Coppa Italia in 2019-20, but Meret was the keeper in goal for that cup. Pepe Reina followed Rafa Benitez from Liverpool to Napoli. He spent the season on loan, then he left for a season to play for Bayern Munich before returning. He was a classic kind of sweeper keeper for Napoli. He managed 67 clean sheets, which is really good for that era, including winning there wasn't an award, but he recorded the most clean sheets of any goalkeeper in Serie A during the 2017-18 season. And he also won a Coppa Italia in 2013-14. He made 182 appearances for Napoli and conceded 180 goals, so just about a goal per match. Morgan De Sanctis statistically was not the greatest goalkeeper over the 6 seasons that he played for Napoli. He conceded over a goal per game, but he still managed quite a few clean sheets, 71 to be exact. So over 41%, I think, of his appearances were clean sheets. Um, he was one of the faces of our resurgence in Serie A. So we're going to come across a number of those faces as we go through this list. And he won a Coppa Italia in 2011, 2012, which was actually our first Coppa Italia. Might have been, I guess, not our first trophy because we won Serie C, but I guess you could say our first trophy in the top flight of Italian football since the Maradona era. Dino Zoff had an excellent time at Napoli. He made 190 appearances as the Napoli goalkeeper, and while he was at Napoli, he conceded very few goals and he recorded a lot of clean sheets. However, he didn't spend as much time at Napoli, and he certainly didn't win any trophies at Napoli like he did at Juventus, and that's where he gained international acclaim. Now, for the next three goalkeepers, you can make a strong case for any of them to be in our starting 11. The first I have is Claudio Garella, who was lured from Hellas Verona after winning the Scudetto there and delivered our first Scudetto in club history. He also won a Coppa Italia with Napoli. We won a double that season in 86 87. He had an unorthodox style of play, yet he still managed to have one of our lowest goals conceded per match and one of our highest clean sheets rates out of any of the goalkeepers in our history. He made, I think, 115 appearances, so it was only a couple of seasons that he was with the club, 84 goals conceded and 56 clean sheets. Sadly, he passed away at the young age of 38. Now, I really debated whether to include Alex Meret in my starting 11, and I ultimately picked him as my runner-up. He's already made 212 appearances for Napoli, so that's quite a few. And while he does not have the greatest stats, he's conceded over a goal per match over that time. Keep in mind, the more you play, I mean, depending on the era, I suppose that can go up or down, but he's currently at 73 clean sheets. And chances are, because he's spending more time at Napoli, we extended his contract, he is going to likely break the record for most clean sheets in Napoli history. He needs like 8 or 9 more, I believe, to break that record. But the reason why I don't have him as my starting goalkeeper is because Meret has had some really strong defenses in front of him. When you think of Koulibaly and Kim Min Jae and Buongiorno and Rachmani and all these guys, and, clean sheets are as much attributable to the defenses playing in front of the goalkeeper as they are to the goalkeeper themselves. Nonetheless, Meret is probably our most, or at least one of our most decorated goalkeepers in club history. Two Scudetti to his name, as well as a Coppa Italia. That Coppa Italia was won in a penalty shootout, which he was the goalkeeper for and did really well in, and deserves a lot of praise for that. And he's always been an excellent shot stopper, not just from the spot, but from any kinds of shots where he's kind of lacked, and we've discussed this quite a bit on the show, is in his command of the area, his play with his feet, and controlling his back line. So that brings me to my starting goalkeeper, and I am going to go with Giuliano Giuliani. He only spent 2 seasons with Napoli, but he made 98 appearances during those two seasons. He conceded less than a goal per match, and he recorded clean sheets in nearly 50% of the matches that he played in. Now, unlike Garella, Giuliani was a very technically sound goalkeeper. He was very efficient. He was an excellent shot stopper. He was quick off his line, and he kept his back line organized. Garella also led us to a Coppa Italia, a Coppa UEFA in 88-89, and of course to our second Scudetto in club history in 89-90. So he is my starting goalkeeper. And with that, we can move on to our center backs. My first option is Paolo Cannavaro, who was not the most skilled player for Napoli. He was nowhere near as good as his brother Fabio, who, of course, was a World Cup winner with Italy. But he was another key player in our resurgence in the even before the late 2010s. Actually, Cannavaro was part of the side that earned our promotion back to Serie A. He was part of the side that got us back into the UEFA Cup and then back into the Champions League, wearing the captain's armband for a couple of seasons. And in 8 seasons for Napoli, he made 278 appearances for us, winning 2 Coppa Italia. Kim Min Jae was obviously a phenomenal player for us during the 2022-23 season. He won the Serie A Defender of the Year that season. We had all kinds of South Korean fans coming to Napoli and to the Maradona to watch him play, and created this huge buzz in a whole different country, which is great for growing the fan base of the club. But he only played 1 season for Napoli. As you know, he was incredible that season, but that's the reason why I don't have him higher on this list, because despite winning us a Scudetto and being a big part of that team, he stayed only for 1 season. Raul Albiol was part of a trio of Real Madrid players that joined the club, I believe, in 2013, along with Gonzalo Higuain and Jose Maria Callejon. He brought much needed leadership at that time when Napoli was looking to take a next step. I think we had already qualified for the Champions League prior to his arrival, but he was a really important player in helping us stay in that position in the table and compete regularly in the Champions League. Amir Rahmani is a player who is now in his 7th season at Napoli, which is unbelievable. He's really grown with the club, and I don't know if anyone of us kind of expected him to stay that long with Napoli. For a long time, I mean, you're probably wondering why I have him so high on this list, because he's never been considered super important to the club. For a long time, he was considered kind of the second center back, whether he was playing alongside Kalidou Koulibaly or Kim Min Jae, or at least at the start of last season next to Alessandro Buongiorno. But he really did take a big step last season with Buongiorno being injured. He really took on a leadership role, which he has in him because he's the captain of the Kosovo national team. But he was our most reliable defender last season. He played even more minutes than Giovanni Di Lorenzo did. So for that reason, I think he deserves to be on this list. Also, he now has 2 Scudetti and a Coppa Italia to his name. And this season, in all likelihood, he is going to surpass 200 appearances for Napoli. Moreno Ferrario is a player who I admit I'm not super familiar with. He's a bit before my time, but he made over 400 or nearly 400 appearances for Napoli over 11 seasons, culminating with a Coppa Italia and a Scudetto in the 86-87 season. He was a a sweeper who, that's a position that just doesn't exist anymore. And if you're not familiar with Ferrario, you've probably seen him in a picture with Diego Maradona and just didn't realize that's who he was. Alessandro Renica was a key figure for us during the Maradona era. He made 194 appearances for Napoli. He immediately became a starter after joining the club in 1986, also playing as a sweeper. And he had a knack for scoring important goals, including a 30-yard screamer against Atalanta in the final of the Coppa Italia, as well as the match winner against Juventus in the Coppa UEFA quarterfinal. And Renica's Napoli won both of those cups, as well as 2 Scudetti in the late 80s. So that brings me to my 2 starting center backs. And the first on my list is Kalidou Koulibaly. Now, I must admit, I am biased here. Besides Maradona, Koulibaly is probably my favorite Napoli player of all time. Now, he's not as decorated as Renica, but if we're talking about players who shaped the history of the club, for how long he played for Napoli, I think it was 317 appearances over 8 seasons. He won the first Serie A Defender of the Year award. So I don't see how you could leave Koulibaly out of this starting 11. He had many iconic moments with Napoli, but 2 in particular stand out to me. The first was the headed goal he scored against Juventus in the 2017-18 season, and I must admit it had me believing that we might actually finally pull off the Scudetto, and I'm sure a lot of you were feeling the same way. And the other one was his slide tackle on Kylian Mbappe in the Champions League. I think it was even the same match where he kind of pushed Mario Rui to defend Mbappe a little bit quicker. But Koulibaly was an incredible player on and off the pitch. He was often out and about helping people in need, and he didn't do it for the camera. I remember one time he got caught on camera, but he didn't even know it, where he was giving out coats to people during the winter time that needed it. And I think you could say that Lorenzo Insigne was the captain with the armband during that era, but Koulibaly was the captain without the armband. My other starting center back is none other than Ciro Ferrara. He was born in Posillipo. He made 320 appearances for Napoli over 9 seasons. He's incredibly decorated. He basically won everything there was to win during that era: the Coppa Italia, two Scudetti, Coppa UEFA, Supercoppa Italiana. And then he went on, of course, to win many, many more titles for Juventus. But it's hard to hold that against him because shortly after he was sold, Napoli pretty much went bankrupt and folded. He continued to produce beyond his playing career. He started the Ferrara Cannavaro Foundation, or the Cannavaro Ferrara Foundation, with the Cannavaro brothers to help people in need, in disadvantaged kids, especially in Neapolitan neighborhoods. And in 2020, he published a book titled Ho visto Maradona e dico ovvero. So those are my starting center backs: Kalidou Koulibaly and Ciro Ferrara. Next, let's move on to our fullbacks. Starting at left back, I'm going to go with Mario Rui, who for a period of time was probably our most disliked Napoli player. But after 7 seasons and 227 appearances, culminating in our first Scudetto in 33 years, he ended up being one of our most loved players. He was a fantastic crosser of the ball. He was probably the best crosser of the ball in the league in that 22-23 season, which was a great asset to have when you had a player like Victor Osimhen waiting in the area to receive those crosses. His football IQ was very high. That is why Maurizio Sarri nicknamed him Il Maestro. And his personality was bigger than his stature. He did not back down from anyone. And I genuinely believe that Khvicha Kvaratskhelia suffered a little bit the following season after the departure of Mario Rui because he didn't have that player to have his back behind him. Fauzi Ghulam was so good for Napoli that we reportedly rejected a 45 million euro offer for him from Manchester United. He was originally a winger, so he was also an excellent crosser of the ball, but he played at left back for us. And he had the rare combination of size and athleticism. And I actually think that in the modern game, he'd probably play more as an attacking center back, kind of like the role that Alessandro Bastoni plays for Inter. Unfortunately, his career was cut a little bit short. Well, it really did kind of end. He never really came back to the same level after he suffered the torn ACL playing against Manchester City in the Champions League. Giovanni Francini made 249 appearances for Napoli over 7 seasons. He joined Napoli in 1987, so right after our first Scudetto, but he was a key player for us in winning the Coppa UEFA, then our second Scudetto, and then the Supercoppa Italiano. And a quick anecdote that I came across when I was doing my research for this episode, it was about a goal that he scored for us in the 87-88 season against Roma, where we were losing 1-0, and then Careca and Renica both got themselves sent off. So Napoli were playing with 9 men, and it was Francini that scored an equalizer with a header from a corner kick. But I'm going to have to go with Ruud Krol as my starting left back. Now, I'm cheating a little bit here because he was probably more known to be a libero or a center back during his time at Napoli, but he did also play a little bit at left back, so I'm not cheating too much. Krol was actually purchased from the Vancouver Whitecaps in Canada, which is where I'm from, but this was well before the MLS ever existed. Krol quickly became the star of the team before the Maradona era. He was the star player. He was an intelligent player. He was big and physical, but he was also very elegant. And he very nearly captained us to our first Scudetto in a couple of seasons. Actually, his first 2 seasons, we finished third and fourth, I believe, respectively, in the league. And in 1981, he was named the best foreign player in Serie A. So I am going to go with Ruud Krol as my starting left back. Now, right back isn't exactly or hasn't exactly been one of the strongest positions in Napoli's history, but we do have a few decent options, starting with Christian Maggio, who was one of my favorite players when I was a young Napoli fan, younger, I guess you could say. He probably wasn't as good in reality as I thought he was, but he was certainly loyal to the club. He made over 300 appearances for Napoli in 9 seasons. And probably the reason why I liked him so much is because I just remember him bombing up and down that right wing. He was had an incredible engine on him. And really, he was making attacking runs before it was cool for fullbacks to get forward. Giovanni Bruscolotti is the second most capped player in Napoli history. I will let you guess who the most capped player is, but that's what happens when you spend 15 seasons with a single club. That simply does not happen anymore in today's game. His longevity alone would probably get him onto this list, but he was also very decorated. He had two Coppa Italia and a Scudetto, and he might be, I haven't looked this up, but he's certainly one of the few, if not the only player in Napoli history to have those three things: two Coppa Italia and a Scudetto, because his two Coppa Italia were 11 seasons apart. The first was in the 75-76 season, and the second was in the 86-87 season. He also won the Coppa di Lega Italo-Inglese, or the Anglo-Italian League Cup, which was a competition between the winner of the Coppa Italia and the English League Cup. He was a five-time captain for Napoli, and he was a physical specimen, and that earned him the nickname Paolo e Fiero, which was the Iron Pole. So there is a very strong case to be made for Bruscolotti to be in the starting 11, but I am going to go with Giovanni Di Lorenzo as my starting right back for the very simple reason that he is the only player other than Diego Maradona to captain Napoli to two Scudetti. And actually, he did it in fewer seasons. It took 4 seasons for Maradona. Obviously, Maradona had a bigger impact individually, but Di Lorenzo did it in only 3 seasons. In only 6 seasons for us, he has been an absolute workhorse. As you know, he's already collected 270 appearances for Napoli. And as you probably also know, he almost never comes off. He usually plays the full 90 minutes whenever he plays. He's been also productive for us in an attacking sense. He scored some really important goals for us during those Scudetto seasons. And I looked it up. Over the 6 seasons, he's only missed 17 matches. And I think 5 of those were due to suspensions for yellow card accumulation. So he has really been a Iron Man for this club. He's really embraced wearing the captain's armband. You always see him. He's one of the first players celebrating with his teammates whenever they score. They get a big embrace from him. Now, he might have lost some Napoli fans when he was rumored to join Juventus at the start of, or during the summer of 24, I guess it was. But I think we can all say that he has more than atoned for that. So I have Giovanni Di Lorenzo joining Ruud Krol as my starting fullbacks. Now, as I said, I'm using a 4-2-3-1 formation. So I'm going to have two defensive midfielders, or a double pivot, in my starting 11. And what I should note is that this formation doesn't really leave room for box to box midfielders. So what I'm going to do is split them either into defensive midfielders or into attacking midfielders, of the number 10 position in my starting 11. So let's start with Alan, who was a proper destroyer during the Maurizio Sarri era. He was a tenacious player. He was full of energy. He played with heart, but he was also a good dribbler of the ball. He was able to progress the ball forward and create some chances for his teammates. Next, we have Salvatore Bagni, who was a player with very similar characteristics as Alan: hardworking, tenacious, good on the ball. Paired with Fernando De Napoli in the center of the Napoli midfield, he played behind Maradona for a couple of seasons, including during the 86-87 season. And even though he had a friendly character, he was an aggressive player and sometimes even reckless on the pitch. I mentioned that match against Roma earlier. Apparently, uh, Bani made an offensive gesture to the fans after that match, and that is reportedly what ruined the relationship between Napoli and Roma, which was friendly up until that point. Bagni was replaced by Massimo Crippa, who made over 200 appearances for Napoli over 5 seasons. Now, in addition to being a dedicated, hard work, tenacious player like Alan and Bagni were, Crippa also had incredible stamina. Now, pretty much any player during the Maradona era should probably be on this list just because of their trophy case, even if they only played a few seasons for Napoli. And the same can be said of Alemão and Francesco Romano. Romano made 150 appearances for Napoli over 3 seasons from 86 to 89, and then Alemão made 133 appearances for Napoli over 4 seasons from 88 to 92. So between the two of them, they pretty much covered the entire Maradona era and all the trophies we won during that time frame. And I appreciate I am definitely not doing justice to the quality of these two players during that time. Next, I have Andre Frank, Zambo, and Gisa, who probably should be higher on this list. I really struggled with the placement of Anguissa on this list, only because it's hard to assess, which players were more important during those couple of Scudetti seasons. Was Anguissa more important than someone like Lobotka was in the 22-23 season? Was he as important as Scott McTominay was in the 24-25 season? At the end of the day, though, he was a very important player, even if he wasn't as important as those guys during our two Scudetti campaigns. He's been super reliable for Napoli. Every manager leans on him heavily to play a ton of minutes. He is a ball winning midfielder. He runs up and down. Like I said, one of these box to box midfielders that I had to put into a category. He's already up to 154 appearances over only 4 seasons, and it looks like he's going to stay longer at Napoli, which I'm very happy about. And it's easier to forget, considering how good he's been for us, that we purchased him from Fulham when they were in the second division of English football with it was like a 1 million euro loan and 16 million euro option to buy, which he has way more than compensated for with what he's delivered for Napoli. Speaking of reliable players, next on my list is Fernando de Napoli. He literally has of Napoli in his name. He made 242 appearances for Napoli in only 5 seasons, and those 5 seasons were from 1986 to 1992. So he played with all the other guys on this list from that era: Bagni, Crippa, Alemão, Romano, and he won everything there was to win, like Maradona did: two Scudetti, Coppa Italia, Coppa UEFA, Supercoppa Italiana. And he was nicknamed Rambo because both of his hair and because of the grinta that he played with and he showed on the pitch. So that brings me to my two starting central defensive midfielders. The first on my list is Jorginho, who is a player that doesn't have any titles to his name or many titles to his name, but he was an incredible player for us. And it's remarkable to think that after making 160 appearances for Napoli, he then went on to make over 200 appearances for Chelsea. Now, Maurizio Sarri deserves a lot of credit for having the vision to play Jorginho as a deep lying playmaker. And from there, he really exploded in his career. He obviously wasn't the physical ball winner like a lot of the guys are on this list, but Sadi really exploited the other qualities that he had in him, from his vision to his positional awareness to his ability to pass the ball and his composure on the ball as well. He didn't win a Scudetto for Napoli, unfortunately, but he was part of that team that reached 91 points, and that is just about as close as you can get to winning a Scudetto. My second starting holding midfielder is Stanislav Lobotka. Now, there might be a little bit of recency bias here, but I don't think too many people are going to argue with this choice. If you recall, his time at Napoli actually started out quite rough. He was brought into Napoli during the same January that Diego Demme was brought in, and that was shortly after Gattuso was brought in to kind of steady the ship, and Gattuso preferred Diego Demme. Lobotka wasn't playing a lot. He started to gain weight. He was ridiculed by fans. They were calling him things like Dad Botka and so on. But I don't think you can argue that any player, maybe in the history of this club, has had a greater turnaround. Maybe Mario Rui, but not even that, is as big of a turnaround as Stanislav Lobotka has had with Napoli. And I think we all owe a big thank you to Luciano Spalletti for doing that. He turned Lobotka into an absolutely world class midfielder for us, to the point where even the best midfielders in the world, like Xavi, were complimenting him. And for a while, he was linked to a move to Barcelona because that is how good he was and is. And actually, I think he would have fit perfectly in Barcelona's system and the way they play the game. But he's already in his seventh season now with Napoli. He's going to surpass 200 appearances. And you can make the argument that no single Napoli player has been more important for us during the last 3 or 4 seasons, including the really difficult season in between the two Scudetti under Garcia and Mazzari and Calzona. So for me, Lobotka deserves to be in the starting 11 alongside Jorginho. So that completes kind of the back half of our starting 11. Let's now move into the attacking half. All right, so let's start with the left wingers. And the first on my list is Ezekiel El Pocho Lavezzi, who was another face of our resurgence in the mid 2000s. He was one of the tre tenori, the three tenors of that era. And even though he only won one Coppa Italia, he made 188 appearances, I believe, for Napoli. I think you can make a strong case that if it wasn't for that era of players who consistently qualified for the Champions League and consistently brought in much needed revenue for the club, then we probably wouldn't be in the position that we are in today. He was a tenacious, fiery player. He had a lot of passion. He was basically a Scunizzo, which made him well loved by Napoli supporters. And it obviously helps that he was Argentinian. It also helps that he didn't really like Juventus a whole lot. There's that famous image where all the Napoli and Juventus players are kind of arms interlocked as a show of good sportsmanship, and Lavezzi is standing there with his arms behind his back, and that made him even more loved and idolized by Napoli supporters. Bruno Giordano spent only 3 seasons at Napoli. He actually spent a lot more time at Lazio after that, but he was a key figure for us during those 3 seasons. He scored a number of goals. He was the capocannoniere in the Coppa Italia during the 86-87 season when he won the double with us. And of course, he was the G in the Magica trio with Maradona and Careca. Now, the next pick on my list is going to be a bit of a hot take for not having him higher on the list, and that is Khvicha Kvaratskhelia, especially when you consider who I have above him. But obviously, he was one of the most important players for us during the 2022-23 season. He scored some incredible goals. If you think of the solo effort against Atalanta, where he was cutting in and out before eventually scoring. The solo goal against Sassuolo was another one, and so many brilliant goals for Napoli during his time with us. He scored 30 goals and added 29 assists in only 2.5 seasons with Napoli, 107 appearances. But he really did bring the magic back to Napoli in a position that, or just generally, players with skill that take on their man 1v1 are becoming a rare and rarer breed of player, and that earned him the nicknames Kvaradonna and Kvaravaggio. Now, unfortunately, his time at Napoli was a little bit short-lived. He did kind of use Napoli as a stepping stone to get to PSG, and that wasn't appreciated by a lot of fans. Thankfully, we still went on to win the Scudetto, because I think his reputation might have been more tarnished if we didn't, because people would have been looking back and thinking, would we have won the Scudetto if Kvaratskhelia stayed at Napoli? But I do think eventually one day we are going to look back and think very fondly of his time at Napoli. And now part of the reason why you might consider that a hot take is because I have Lorenzo Insigne above Kvaratskhelia on this list. But keep in mind, we are picking some of the most influential players in club history, not necessarily, certainly not the ones who won the most titles, because if it was the most titles, I would have had Kvaratskhelia as my starting left winger. Even if you think of the most influential players in club history, you might still put Kvaratskhelia ahead of Insigne. And if you do disagree with this pick, and any of the other picks for that matter, be sure to let me know down in the comments and we can have a conversation about it. But Insigne spent a long time with this club. He had 10 seasons with the senior team, 434 appearances, which is fourth most in club history. He was our captain for 4 of those seasons, even though I don't necessarily feel like he was the best captain. He scored 122 goals for Napoli, which is second most in club history, only one more than the player that's third on the list. And a lot of those goals were from his classic Otiragir, where he would cut in from the left wing onto his right boot and curl the ball into the top corner at the far post. He added 95 assists during his time at Napoli. A lot of those were his connection with Jose Callejon, who would make the run to the second post. And just like the Tiragir, he would curl the ball to Callejon. And that was another kind of Sadi, was it Sadi? I think Sadi trademark. Um, Now, obviously, his reputation was also a little bit tarnished with how he left the club. His announcement that he was leaving was made in January of a season where we were still competing for the Scudetto, and he went to Toronto FC and MLS. I am from Toronto, and I can tell you he's now left Toronto, and he's pretty hated here as well. But I don't think you can deny, just considering how much time he gave to the club, how many appearances he made, how many goals he scored, how many assists he made. He had that brilliant goal in the Champions League way back where he scored from 40 or 50 yards out. I don't think you could deny. We can debate how high he should be on the list of best ever left wingers for Napoli, but I don't think you should or you can deny that he should be on this list. Now, no one's going to disagree with my starting left winger, although you might disagree with him being considered a winger at all. I'm cheating a little bit, and that is Dries Ciro Mertens. He is a true son of Napoli. That is why he is nicknamed Ciro, because it is a very common Napolitano name, and it is the name he then passed on to his son, who was born in Napoli. Now, the reason I'm cheating a little bit is because even though he started out his Napoli career as a left winger, as most of us know, Mertens had most of his success playing as a false nine under Maurizio Sarri. And the only reason, frankly, that I'm putting him on the left wing is because we have such an abundance of incredible strikers that played for Napoli over the years that this allows me to free up the striker position for someone else. But Mertens was such an incredible player for us. I mentioned the incredible goals that Kvaratskhelia scored. Just YouTube Mertens highlight goals for Napoli, and you will see that just the number, the creative chips, and the incredible touches. It just scored in so many different ways. He didn't score a lot of headers, obviously, because of his size, but beautiful, beautiful goals. And what's really incredible about Mertens is that even if he didn't score that many goals, he would still probably be top of this list of left wingers because he really was one of the most influential players on the city and on the club just because of his personality, super extroverted and outgoing, not afraid to go walking out in the open, and actually relished the time with the fans. Lots of pictures, lots of autographs. He loves his home in Napoli and will spend a lot of it. I don't know if he'll live there permanently, but he certainly plans on spending a lot of time there and just enjoying the city and his home. Super loved by the Tifosi, super loved by his fellow teammates, by the warehouse workers. His one of his closest friends is Tommaso Starace, who is well loved. One of the only player, or sorry, not player, the only person who's been at Napoli for all four Scudetti. But Mertens had such a great relationship with Starice that he dedicated one of his goal celebrations to him. He also had the famous dog at the corner flag one. So, in all respects, Ciro Mertens absolutely deserves to be on this list. And for me, is my starting left winger. Moving on to the right wing, again, not a position where we have a ton of depth in club history. The right side has been just, I guess, our weaker side of the field over the years. But we do have a couple of options, starting with Jose Maria Callejon. He was the second of that trio of players who joined us from Real Madrid, and he will go down as one of our most prolific wingers with 82 goals and 79 assists at Napoli. As I mentioned, many of those goals were scored from that trademark run to the back post that Insigne would pick out. He was super loyal to Napoli. In addition to making 349 appearances for Napoli, he also played for us for 2 months for free and that was because of the delays caused by the lockdown during the Scudetto season. So that season went well beyond June 30th, and he did not ask for a penny for doing that. He didn't win a Scudetto, but he did win two Coppa Italia with the club. And even though he got a little bit of hate near the end of his time at Napoli, I think he will still be remembered quite fondly. Now, like Mario Rui, Matteo Politano is another player who still gets a lot of hate from select Napoli supporters. I think over time he has really earned the respect of a lot of Napoli tifosi. He doesn't score enough goals for a winger, but at least in his latter seasons, especially in the Scudetto season under Antonio Conte, he did compensate for that with his work rate. Conte essentially converted him into a defender. He played more as a wing back. He ran like crazy, again, up and down that right wing. And so while he didn't contribute as much in attack, he certainly contributed in defense. Conte also got him to start crossing the ball more with his right foot, and that makes him less predictable because he is dangerous when he cuts in on his left foot, kind of like Insigne did on the left wing, cutting onto his right. That's what Politano does on the opposite wing. Conte also increased his stamina, which is interesting that he has such a good relationship with Conte because Conte is the one who kicked him out of Inter when they were together there. But Conte has said that Politano has really matured over the years, and by increasing his stamina, he's played a lot more minutes under Conte than he did, say, under Spalletti, where it would seem like as soon as that 60-minute mark would hit, he would be taken off. Now, Napoli were competing in multiple competitions then, but still, Politano has become more and more important for us. And he also has really embraced the city. And I think that's earned him a lot more respect from the fans as well. One thing I always bring up with Politano is even in the season where we finished 10th, he was standing there unrecognized by a lot of Napoli supporters next to Di Lorenzo apologizing to the Ultras. So I have Politano as my backup right winger. And my starting right winger is another. I am cheating. I've cheated quite a bit on this list. I'm not going to lie. And I'm going to put Careca at the right wing. Now, this is definitely cheating because he was more of a number 9. He wasn't. You could say I'm cheating because he played kind of alongside Maradona but really Maradona was the 10 and Careca was the 9. Nonetheless, I need to save that number 9 for another player. So I am going to cheat and put Careca on the right wing. He was an incredible goal scorer in his own right, which is really hard to do when you're playing with a player like Maradona, who obviously stole the spotlight. Careca scored 95 goals over 6 seasons with Napoli. He was the second top scorer in Serie A in a couple of seasons. And again, it was only because he was playing with Maradona, who was the top scorer during those seasons. So he was a really important part of the team that won 3 trophies between 1988 and 1991, starting with the Coppa UEFA, then the second Scudetto, and then the Supercoppa Italiana. So that means I have Careca on the right wing and Dries Mertens on the left wing. And that brings us to probably the easiest position to pick on the field, which is our attacking midfielder or number 10. Now, even though the number 10 position pretty much picks itself, there are a few players that are worth mentioning. One player that I kind of debated whether to include on this list or not is Fabian Ruiz. He's been phenomenal for PSG since he joined them, especially under Luis Enrique. But at Napoli, he was pretty inconsistent. There were some matches where he was unbelievable, and then there were other matches where he was pretty invisible. One thing you can't deny is that he is one of the best players in Napoli history at scoring from outside of the areas. He had some seasons where all of his goals were from outside of the area. And one of those goals was a late winner against Lazio in the 21-22 season, Spalletti's first season, that really, again, had us thinking that we might be able to pull off a Scudetto. Unfortunately, we weren't able to hold on to it that year. Another player who was very hot and cold for us was Piotr Zielinski. I found he tended to start seasons really well and he would score a lot of goals at the beginning of the season and then he would kind of fade and be less relevant as the season progressed. But he still gave us 364 appearances over 7 seasons. He scored 51 goals and added 46 assists, which is not insignificant. And he will forever be part of one of the best, sort of most iconic moments in Napoli history, and that is Giacomo Raspadori's goal against Juventus in the 2022-23 season. Now, it wasn't the goal that officially secured the title for us, but it did feel like it did. It was an away match, and that was the match where everyone was FaceTiming on their way back and welcomed by all the fans when they landed in Napoli. And Zielinski famously, after that goal was scored very, very late, I think it was a stoppage time winner from Raspadori, he collapsed on the ground just in sheer joy and exhaustion and relief. And I'm sure a whole bunch of other emotions were going through him at the time. So I have Zielinski on my list of number 10s. Scott McTominay was one of the most important players in the 24-25 Scudetto winning season. Besides Antonio Conte, he was our most important signing. He scored 13 goals across all competitions, 12 in the league, and added 6 assists. Conte famously now called upon McTominay to score more goals ahead of the match against Empoli on match day 32, and he proceeded to score a brace in that match. He very nearly scored a tripleta. He hit the crossbar, I believe, or the post. Otherwise, he would have scored a hat trick. Including those 2 goals, he went on to score 6 goals, half of his league tally, in the final 7 matches of the season, and he was deservedly named the MVP of Serie A that season. The only reason I don't have him higher on this list is because he's only been with Napoli for 1 season. We'll see how long he stays. It doesn't look like he plans on leaving anytime soon. And so I imagine, or I suspect, if I were to make another one of these videos in a few years' time, McTominay will probably be higher up on the list. And he too will have forever one of the most iconic photos in the history of this club. Gianfranco Zola was another player who peaked post Napoli, but he was still a very, very good player while he was at Napoli. Zola was discovered by Luciano Moggi, of all people, while he was the sporting director at Napoli, playing in Serie C for Torres. And he eventually earned the nickname Zola Donna because he was so similar to Maradona in terms of his stature and his characteristics. Now, his characteristics were no fluke because he would spend hours and hours training with Maradona after training, taking free kicks. He was very much the understudy to Maradona. Maradona took a liking to him. They spent so much time together. Zola said he learned everything he knew how to do from Maradona. He used to secretly spy on him, taking free kicks, and that's how he learned how to curl the ball. And there's a great story in John Ludden's book called Once Upon a Time in Naples that I highly recommend, where he talked about how there was a Coppa Italia match where Maradona wore the number 10 shirt against Pisa, I believe, and he said at the time that he was wearing the shirt as a tribute to his good friend Careca, who wasn't able to play in the match. I think it was due to injury, if I recall correctly. But we later learned that at least part of the reason why Maradona wanted to wear the number 9 shirt is so that Zola could have the experience of wearing the number 10 shirt. And I don't think there is a greater honor in football than to have the number 10 shirt passed on to you by the great Maradona. Of course, he went on, Zola, that is, went on to have an incredible career. First, a couple of matches or a couple of seasons, that is, with Parma, followed by many seasons where he made his name at Chelsea. But the only league title he had to his name as a professional player was the Scudetto he won with Napoli in the 89-90 season. Marek Hamsik was affectionately nicknamed Marek Chiaro and was the second of the 3 tenors at Napoli. He is the all-time appearance leader for Napoli with 520 appearances. He was an attacking weapon for Napoli. He really kind of redefined the attacking midfielder role for Napoli during that era. He scored 121 goals, which puts him third on the list in terms of most goals ever scored by a Napoli player, only 1 goal behind Lorenzo Insigne, and he added 100 assists as well. He wore the captain's armband for half of his seasons at Napoli. So 6 seasons, he wore the armband. During that time, we won 2 Coppa Italia and a Supercoppa Italiana. And he was a true captain. I mean, the famous Coppa Italia match against, I think it was the Fiorentina one, where There was the incident outside of the stadium, and he almost didn't end up. That match almost never proceeded, but Hamsik got involved. He spoke to the ultras, he spoke to the officials, and eventually the match was played. Um, when he at the time, just to go back to his goals, he was our all-time leading goal scorer. He had surpassed Maradona, and then eventually Insigne and Mertens would overtake him. But Hamsik was just an incredible player for us. He did so much for the team on and off the pitch. I think most of us would absolutely love if he would play a role in the club in the future as some sort of director or executive. He is getting his coaching badges, so who knows? Maybe one day he will coach the club. I think even he's open to the idea of being involved with the club in the future. And if all of that is not enough, he was the one who recommended to Napoli that they have a look at this player named Stanislav Lobotka, and now he is on our starting 11 of best ever Napoli players. But as I said, it goes without saying who the starting number 10 is on this list, and that is Diego Armando Maradona Dios. He is truly a god in the city of Naples. All you have to do is either speak to someone who's been there if you haven't been there yourself, or have a trip and walk around the city, and you will see what Maradona means to Napoli. Even after we won 2 more Scudetti, no one touches Maradona in the city of Napoli. So he is our starting number 10, and that leaves us only now with our starting striker. Now, despite having Careca and Mertens on the wings, I still have 7 options at striker, and that just tells you what quality we've had at the striker position over the years. Starting with Roberto El Pampa Sosa, he was the first player registered by Napoli after De Laurentiis purchased the club in 2004. And even though he scored only 30 goals for us as a player, he was the striker that led us to promotion from Serie C to Serie B, and then subsequently from Serie B to Serie A. El Pampa was the last ever player to wear the number 10 shirt in Napoli before it was effectively retired. You might have seen a picture of Souza sitting on top of the goal. That was the last time the number 10 shirt was worn at the San Paulo. Now, the next 3 players were all well before any of our time, so forgive me if I look away to read some of these stats. But the first is Jose Altafini, who played 7 seasons for Napoli from the mid 60s through to the early 70s. Altafini and Omar Sivori, who I probably should have included in the list of midfielders, were known as the Duo della Meraviglia, the marvelous duo. Together with Dino Zoff, they led Napoli to a second place finish in the 67-68 season. And Altafini finished his Napoli career with 71 goals in 180 appearances. Attila Salustro was a Napoli player before Napoli were known as the club they are officially known as today. He played for the youth team of Internazionale Napoli in the early 1920s and eventually graduated to the senior team, which was then called Inter Napoli. Salustro scored 116 goals for Napoli over 12 seasons, and he missed the end of the 1930-31 season to serve in the military, which Napoli suffered as a result of before he then returned to the club. Antonio Voyak was Salustro's strike partner from 1929 to 1935. Voyak scored nearly as many goals as Salustro, despite playing there for about half the time. He played half the number of games, or I think in 6 seasons instead of 12. And in 4 of his 6 seasons, he scored at least 20 goals. So he was an absolute killer. For 78 years, Voyak was the Napoli player with the most goals ever scored in Serie A, and it was only until Dries Mertens overtook him in 2021 that record was broken. Now, the next player, you may or may not want to put him higher on the list. I don't know. I think this is probably the right spot for him, and that is Gonzalo Higuain. He was the third of the 3 players that joined from Real Madrid in 2013. He is now hated by most Napoli fans, not only for his transfer to Juventus, but because he celebrated a goal that he scored against us. By the way, that sale to Juventus remains a record sale for Napoli of 90 million euros. But again, all he's remembered for, at least by some fans, is the fact that he went to our bitter rivals. But while he was at Napoli, he was absolutely an unbelievable player. He continues to hold the record for the most goals scored in a Serie A campaign, which he achieved in a just unbelievable way. He needed to score 3 goals in the final match of the season against Frosinone to equal Gino Rossetti's record. And not only did he do that, but he capped it off by scoring with a scissor kick or a ridiculous overhead kick from pretty far away. Of course, he went on to win the Capocannoniere that season. All told, Higuain scored 91 goals in only 3 seasons at Napoli, which is a ridiculous average of 30 goals per season across all competitions. And the only reason I don't have him higher on this list is because I don't think he was as influential on the city of Napoli as Victor Osimhen. Osimhen was a record signing for Napoli. We paid about 78 million euros to get him from Ligue 1. That turned out to be a somewhat controversial transfer because we only paid 50 million euros in cash, which still, by the way, would have been a record signing for us. But the balance was paid for in youth players who never really amounted to anything at Lille. And controversy kind of surrounded Osimhen throughout his time at Napoli, whether it was because of injuries he suffered on international duty with Nigeria and in the Africa Cup of Nations, or because of the now famous or infamous TikTok coconut video. But on the pitch, Osimhen was an exceptional player for us. He scored 76 goals in only 133 appearances for us. Some of the goals he scored in the 2022-23 season were absolutely ridiculous. If you think of the both goals he scored against Roma that season, the goal he scored against Sassuolo from a really tight angle, and he got a tripleta in that goal. He won the Capocannoniere for us, and before that, he was the youth player of the season, I believe, for Napoli. He was truly a superhero for Napoli, and of course, he had the mask to go with it because of the injury he suffered playing against Inter when he collided with Milan Skriniar. And since then, he has never played without that mask. It's kind of become his source of power. Naples was so in love with Victor Osimhen that they dedicated an entire cake to him. Unfortunately and understandably, the relations between the club and the player soured, not only from that TikTok video, but there was also a video that our social media admin, for some reason, thought was a good idea to tease Osimhen or make fun of him for missing a penalty kick. And so by the time you see this video or listen to this podcast, Osimhen will probably be a Galatasaray player. What we're seeing in the reports is that he's still going to be sold for a ridiculous sum of money in the neighborhood of 75 million euros plus bonuses and sell-on fees and restrictions on future sales, even though he has only 1 season left on his contract. And that just tells you how valuable of a player Victor Osimhen was as a striker for Napoli. So that brings us to our starting striker, and I am going to go with Edinson Cavani. He scored 104 goals with us in only 3 seasons as a Napoli player. El Matador was an absolutely goal machine for us. That is nearly 35 goals per season, including the Capocannoniere in the 2012-13 season. Just to put it into perspective, how many goals this guy scored in such a short period of time, it took Dries Mertens 8 seasons to get to 148 goals. So only 44 more than Cavani scored in only 3 seasons. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that had Cavani stayed longer, he would have broken the goal scoring record, and probably by a wide margin. Who knows? He might have never been caught given how short of time players spend at a club these days. Just to give you a sense of his goal scoring capacity, after he left Napoli, he went on to score 200 goals for PSG. And even at the age of 38, he is still scoring goals for Boca Juniors, which we kind of like because there is that connection with Maradona, who was also a Boca player once upon a time. Cavani scored 6 hat-tricks for us, and that does not include the hat-trick he scored against Juventus in the Berlusconi Cup, which is basically a glorified friendly. One of those hat-tricks was against Lazio, in which was what was probably the wildest game I've ever seen in Napoli history. It was a back and forth game. We came from behind a couple of times. We ended up winning the game 4-3. Lazio probably should have had another goal that was wrongfully disallowed. It looked to me on the replay like the ball hit the crossbar and crossed the line, but nonetheless, it was disallowed. It was 3-3. Cavani scores the winner with a pallonetto, no less, to get us a 4-3 win. And that was not even his most famous goal, I think, for Napoli. I think the most famous one was the goal he scored, the last minute winner against Lecce, where Gianluca Grava cleared the ball off the line. And then moments later, Cavani picks up the ball, and we had Carlo Alvino on the broadcast yelling, Vai Matador, Vai Matador. And then, of course, he cuts back in on his right foot and launches an absolute rocket from outside of the area into the top corner to get the win. That really sums up the type of player that Cavani was, an exceptional striker for Napoli, absolutely killer with the ball at his feet. So I have him as my starting striker. So that is our starting 11. Just to summarize, we have Giuliano Giuliani in goal, Kalidou Koulibaly and Ciro Ferrara at center back, Ruud Krol and Giovanni Di Lorenzo at fullback, Jorginho and Stanislav Lobotka as our double pivot, Careca and Dries Mertens both playing out of position on the wings, Diego Armando Maradona as our number 10, and Edinson Cavani at striker. If you're watching this on YouTube, please let me know down below in the comments if you agree or if you disagree. And if you do disagree, let us know who you would have in your starting 11 as your best ever Napoli starting 11. If you're listening to the audio version of this and you want to have a conversation, you can find me on all the usual social media channels at Forza Napoli Pod, or you can find me personally on X at Joe_Fischetti5. I will be back soon with another episode. I'm planning to do one at some point during the Retiro at Di Mauro. There are a couple of friendlies that will be played there. So I will be back soon. In the meantime, if you haven't already, be sure to check out the player profile we did on Noah Lang with Yura Van Wanrooy. But until then, or until next time, I'm Joe Fischetti. Forza Napoli sempre.